I first learned how to make baskets back in 1972. At that time I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was crocheting doilies and knitting and doing all sorts of handcrafts. But I never really finished my projects, and I decided I needed to focus with myself and what was then a hobby. And I thought about what it is I would really like to learn, and I really liked baskets. Anytime I was given gift money, I would buy a basket. And so I saw they were offering a community ed class at what was then Marshall U in Dinkytown, and I signed up for a 4-week class. And I took that 4-week class from someone who happened to not be a basket maker but was teaching a variety of crafts. And I saw a few months later they were offering another class in basketry, but it was 8 weeks long. And so I signed up for that class, and that class was taught by a woman who made her living as a weaver. And I was so impressed that someone could make their living doing what they truly loved doing. And so I thought I had learned all there was about basketry in those short 8 weeks, and learned that there was so much more to learn. And so I started reading books, and I started taking more classes, and I took classes on Navajo loom weaving, frame loom weaving, and here I was again taking, putting my time into making things but not really feeling that satisfied with them. So I learned that I was really drawn to 3-dimensional objects, and so I just continued making baskets. I would make them for gifts. I did not sell my work at that time. I never thought about doing that actually. And I just continued to create baskets because I just thoroughly enjoyed the process. The woman that I took the class with made her living as a weaver, and that so impressed me that that had a huge influence on me in my life. I ended up working in a corporate position outside of, in a town that I lived near when I lived in Wisconsin. And I ended up working there 12 years, and I left that job in 1990 to make baskets full-time. And I started out doing art fairs locally, meaning here in the Twin Cities, and I also began teaching basketry classes. And that ended up becoming a career for myself, and I am still making them. Right now I consider myself more of a fiber artist because my work has left contemporary basketry to some degree. I'm still using a basketry technique, but my forms have taken on more of a sculptural appearance.
So how far back does the impulse to make things go? I mean, that one's older than basketry by a long time, right?
How far back?
In your life.
You know, as a child, I always liked making things. I remember braiding dandelion stems and leaving the flower heads on them and making little crowns that you could wear on your head. And I don't remember when I didn't make things. I loved to color as a kid. I would beg somebody to color with me if I could invite somebody to color with me. I thought that was really fabulous. But I enjoyed coloring on my own as well. And I would weave. My father made me a potholder loom, and I don't know if you recall those loops that you would make potholders out of. Well, I made those forever. It seemed like to me that was fun. I liked embroidery. I had a grandmother that crocheted doilies, and that was magical to me to see this thread come off this spool and with this wire hook, she would create these beautiful doilies. And so I learned how to make doilies at that time too, when I was fairly young. So I really don't recall a time when I didn't make things.
Do you come from a family of makers?
Not really. My mother was always one to read books. She was never interested, that I know of anyway, in making anything. And my father was not creative in that way as well. I didn't live with anyone that created anything, although there are ways of being creative besides producing a basket, but probably more in writing.
No, my mother is a maker. My father, not so much. I think the only thing I've ever seen him make is cattle fences, and I think the cattle even found them funny. It was so clearly not what he was up to. So I kind of, seeing my mother and my father, I sort of saw always the division between the person who was driven in every area of her life to make things, and somebody who just, that wasn't his thing at all.
Yeah.
And I guess it left me with some curiosity about what the charm is. I suppose I'm more my father's son than my mother's.
Yeah.
And so the charm, the magic of because it with my mother, it kept coming up. I mean, in every medium she touched, she wanted to do something.
Sure. I would say my influence was my grandmother, who actually lived with me when I was a child. And so she would have been a strong influence on me as far as creating anything. She would let me help her make cookies, and that's a creative process. She always was encouraging that way. And I think, you know, when I was growing up, lives were very busy and people were working really hard, you know, to make a living. And for some people, creating or having that time is really limited. And so my parents were both working quite hard, and so I would imagine they didn't think about coming home and then making something. For me, it's part of who I am, and I can't imagine not making something. And, you know, you have to work hard to get to where you can make a living with what you do, especially if it's artwork, I think.
Was your grandmother in any sense a perfectionist about it all?
She was, yes. She was.
So the feeling of, this isn't good enough.
Well, she was a perfectionist in that she did it well. And that's how I want to be too. If I'm going to do something, I want to do it well. If it's whatever it might be, if you're going to create something, or you know, I don't like to settle for, I like it to be something that I feel really good about.
I remember the lady who lived a quarter mile away down the road as we were growing up made, you know, absolutely inimitable sugar cookies. I think probably because she had the right frying pan, and, you know, with the right sort of cast iron pan, and you'll never get things that crisp out any other way. But one thing about the sugar cookies, which were always wonderful, was they were always the same kind of wonderful. I mean, she had the formula down.
Sure.
And I remember my dad always talking about my aunt's potato salad. And the thing about it, as long as they were mentally solvent, it was always reliably the same. And that's a kind of measure of a certain sort of excellence. The thing's always the same. And then when I hear you talk about baskets, it's, you know, exploring and adventure and new kinds of forms and so forth. When did that idea of exploration within the craft come to you?
Exploring basketry?
Well, I just mean, no, trying out different ideas and having it sort of grow. You know, I can imagine somebody learning to make baskets and continuing to make hundreds of the same basket and hand them out to all of the grandchildren and relatives at various times, and never, you know, never do another kind of basket because this is the one, you know, she had down. How did the idea of this growth thing come into your thinking?
I understand exactly what you're talking about. I remember distinctly me making a conscious decision in the direction of my work. I used to, I did a lot of art fairs, and I would make very functional baskets at that time. Baskets that had handles, some even had names, like a newspaper basket designed to hold your newspapers, napkin baskets designed to hold your napkins, and I would make, at one time I recall making 6 bases. This is where a basket starts, is with the base. I made 6 bases for a jelly jar basket. I was going to make 6 of them. So one day I wove the bases, and the next day I wove the sides, and then the next day I put all the rims on. And they all looked the same. They had different colors, maybe to vary them a little bit, to be appealing to people that like blue, to people that like burgundy or hunter green were always very popular. And I so did not enjoy doing what we would call production work, where you're just basically doing production, almost mechanically. And so but the thing was, they would all sell. They were in a price range where people could afford to buy them as a gift and put 2 jars of jelly in them, or whatever other types of baskets. They had a justification to buy it because they were going to store their magazines in it. There was a use for it. And baskets have always been used for storage and very functional, and work baskets for gathering and so on. I have always become bored with production. I personally don't get any enjoyment out of it, but I also needed to make a living with what I was doing. And so I had to have that compromise. And then one day I decided, you know, I just love making a basket that has more intricate detail to it, and it could still be functional. I started using hand-carved oak handles instead of machine-processed oak and other types of wood handles. And I started putting double rims on my work that stood out from other basket makers' work, and it would take me probably 2-3 days to make one basket. So I took a look at the amount of time I was putting into what I was doing, and now I would sell less baskets that were larger, and then they were more expensive and more detail, versus 6 of another style of basket, of which I was not feeling really rewarded making. So there was a time that I made a conscious decision to go the direction of more detailed work, things that were different, and they cost me more time, and then the price would increase, and it all worked out okay. So I think if you really follow, if you're able to do this, because it sounds easy to really follow your heart and do what you really want to do, that it will work out. For me, I don't think I would have stayed I don't think I would have continued making baskets if I would have had to continue with the production work. So it was a conscious decision.
Yeah. Now, when you started, you were trying all sorts of weaving enterprises, Navajo looms and such like that. What was it about three-dimensional forms? What was it about baskets that caught your imagination particularly?
Other people's baskets, I would talk about that probably more so than my own work at that time. Baskets, as I mentioned when I took an 8-week class thinking now I've learned everything there is, I am still learning after 42 years, I think it's been now, since I made my first basket. I am still learning new things about baskets. In the beginning, in the early years, I was so interested in native baskets and learned that, people that live in different parts of our country even use different materials, and they use materials that grow where they live. And there's a variety of materials that's used. There are 4 basic traditional basketry techniques, and then there are many variations of them. So it's something that you can continue to learn about. I'm never going to know it all. There's always something more, new materials, new techniques, new ways of doing the same old thing that people have done for many years. And I think that's why it's drawn me in, because I'm not satisfied with the production or doing the same thing over and over. So this way I can try different techniques, I can try different ways of applying those techniques.
Are baskets a universal thing, or pretty nearly?
They are. They are. And what's fascinating to me is that there are the 4 traditional basketry techniques: twining, plaiting, wicker, and coiling. And you will find people in a variety of countries that are using the same technique. It made me wonder, how does somebody in Japan use a technique that's done in let's say Alaska? Not, different techniques, similar techniques, and these people never talk to each other to learn from each other. So it's amazing to me to see the same technique used in many different countries. They may use different kinds of material, but the technique of how they construct that piece is the same.
Is there a kind of dialogue between baskets and pots? I mean, I know that some of the techniques overlap, like coiling overlaps between the two. They do, yeah.
Basketry actually preceded pottery. Baskets were used with clay, were used as a mold. So if you had a coiled basket, let's say, in a shallow bowl shape, the clay would be put on the inside and patted into shape, so that piece of pottery would take on that basket shape. And if you find ancient pieces, shards, and there are many pieces that have been found with the actual imprint of the basket in it. So it's interesting, I think, to see that basketry preceded pottery. I would have guessed it was the other way around, but...
So there was a period when pot making was just kind of using the basket as a mold, and then there must have come another point at which people thought, we don't need the mold anymore. We can do
Right.
things with clay just by itself.
That seems reasonable.
And then of course the features of clay began to take on, began to dominate
Sure.
the things you can do with clay that you can't do with
Right.
with fiber.
And the hand-built clay pieces too, I don't know if the coiling with clay, how that came about to play, in relationship to baskets.
Right. Well, just weird curiosity. Have you ever had any temptation in the direction of clay?
I have thought about it, yeah. I would need a kiln and a space to work in that's different from what I have right now. What I have a comfortable studio that's in our home, and the material and the work that I'm doing now doesn't really require any special tools or equipment to make what I make. So for me that's appealing, but I could see if I was going to consider doing something in clay, it would definitely be hand built versus on a wheel.
I see. So you were in a sort of jobby kind of job for a while, and then left that. How did that feel? The move from going to work to making it yourself.
Sure. I left a corporate position in 1990 to make baskets and to do art fairs and to teach. And in 93, I taught at my first national convention, which was in Indiana. And I thought, I'll submit to Indiana or other conferences that I learned existed. There's a whole world out there of baskets and basketry people that I was not aware of. And so I thought I would go maybe once every 3 years. Well, I went in 1993 to teach at my first national convention, and every year thereafter, for many years, I taught at different state conventions. Michigan is the largest convention, and Indiana and North Carolina. So those 3 states have the most basket makers. And then Ohio, there were other conferences that started to spin off from the other conferences, and so there were a variety of states that had these types of things going on that people could attend. And so when I left that job, those first 3 years I worked a lot, volunteering to demonstrate basketry at different local venues. I started teaching in the area that I lived in through all the community eds in the surrounding communities, and then I started teaching at some art centers, and the conventions had kept me busy for quite some time. And there was one month I was traveling 3 weekends out of the month, and this was back when traveling by air was a lot more convenient. You didn't have delays and things now that you can't really rely on to do what I used to do. So I guess when I left that job, I was very happy. I went without any medical insurance for 5 years, and my 2 children were grown up and gone, so it wasn't a matter of having more expenses. Was able to do that, but it was challenging financially. And then after 3 years, things started to fall into place where I had more teaching opportunities and was doing more art fairs, and my work was selling really well. So it all was worth it, and it felt wonderful to do what I really love doing.
I have a friend who has the art fair, does the art fair circuit. That's pretty strenuous stuff, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's, friends would say, "Oh, that must be so much fun. You're going to Indianapolis, tomorrow." And from the time you get to a conference, a basketry conference, first of all, you have to get to the airport, take the plane to your destination, get picked up or have an arrangement made to get you to the hotel, and all of your materials are with you, or you've shipped them ahead of time hoping they make it there on time. But art fairs are a lot of work, just as teaching is a lot of work if you travel and teach at conventions, which is what I was doing. It's work, and then you pack it all up and head home and do it all over again in a couple of weeks. I remember having, my sales were really good we had a art fair here in the Twin Cities it was at St. Catherine's. It was the Minnesota Crafts Council. And in '93 I received an award there, and that was 3 years after I had left my full-time position. And that was a really good year for me. That seemed to make it all have been worth it. All the work I had been doing for the years before that. Finally, I was getting the recognition with my work that was helpful for me to get into other shows and helpful for me to build up some credibility with what I did. But it's a lot of work. I guess most of our places that any of us work is a lot of work. But if it's something that you enjoy doing, it doesn't seem quite so hard.
How does the economics of this work? I mean, I can imagine you've got some things sort of on consignment, is that right?
I have some work at the Grand Hand Gallery right now that's work that I did previous to what I'm currently doing. This new body of work that I've just finished is has been a couple years in the making. And I'm going to see how it's received. The work is not functional, and a lot of times people think of baskets as something that is functional. So to see a fiber object that is non-functional but can be beautiful in form, it's almost, I find it more challenging than if it were a beautiful hand-blown piece of glass or maybe a piece of ceramics. I think that contemporary basketry doesn't necessarily hold anything, and we always think of baskets as being containers. So it'll be interesting to see how this new work is received. It's work that I've really enjoyed making, and I have a lot of myself into the pieces, and I feel good about it, and so that's what really matters, is that I feel really rewarded with the opportunity of having been able to make this body of work. And I hope people will like it.
How's your time divided between making and selling, or making and selling and teaching?
Well, I'm not teaching as much as I used to. I don't travel to the state conventions that I used to, and a lot of the conventions have gotten to be a lot smaller. With the economy, Michigan was the largest basketry conference, and with the economy being hit so hard in Michigan, that conference has gone down to about a third the size of what it used to be. So I'm not teaching as much as I used to. I'm not doing art fairs anymore. There's just, my work has changed so much that I don't think it would work for me to have this work at an art fair. And my teaching is more locally, and that's enjoyable for me. I love to teach.
So the consideration with art fairs, is it that people who come to an art fair are going to be looking more for a present or a more functional basket, and maybe less interested in interesting form?
Yeah, I think that I've worked myself out of that market where when I was making work that was more functional, although I had a transition between my functional work and still working with rattan, and I work primarily with shaping and with patterns, twill patterns, and that work was still really welcomed. Now my work has changed into cotton material, and it's more intricate. It takes a lot of time to make one piece compared to what I was doing previously, which I thought took a lot of time. And so for me to be able to go to an art fair, I think people are looking at more affordable items, not so much an investment. My work today, I would say, would probably be work that someone that collected artwork would probably be people that would be attracted to what my work is today.
So how do museums fit into the story with respect to baskets? Are museums buying pieces, or
I don't know.
you've never sold one to a museum?
Well, the Goldstein Gallery, which is part of the St. Paul campus, has purchased 3 pieces of my work, and that was a few years ago, and I'm trying to think of specifically the pieces that they bought. They were large twill tray pieces that I was making at that time. And so I was fortunate enough that, you know, they were interested in my work, and so I have 3 pieces that's in their permanent collection.
So, I mean, you're in a funny position because the collector, I mean, if I have a fair amount of money and want to collect something, a natural way for me to learn what there is to collect is to go to museums and see what's interesting.
Sure.
But I won't necessarily see baskets at museums.
Sure.
And so it's hard to see kind of how the collectors come to be to make the market for this. Do you know your collectors? Do you talk to them?
I don't, but I would envision that it would be someone that was really interested in fiber art, and they would know by looking at what they're looking at if it's something that's appealing to them visually, and maybe it could be the technique, or I'm using a lot of white heart trade beads on my work right now, and I have some red white heart trade beads that I've had for over 40 years, and I know they were old when I bought them. So somebody that knows, and there are people that know what those beads are, would recognize it, and they may be drawn to that piece just because of that. Hopefully it's the form as well. But I think the collectors know it when they see it. We have talking about museums, Mia, which has a wonderful basket collection, and back in the late 70s I helped catalog that collection. It had been donated. There were over 350 pieces that were donated in 1940 something. I think it was around, well, 1940 something I'll say, because I can't remember specifically that year. But they were donated by a woman named Mrs. C.C. Bovey, and her husband was a physician, and they would go to Arizona each winter, And he would go to the golf course, and she would drag her two little kids with to the reservation and would buy baskets directly from the makers. And so this collection was cataloged in the late 70s, and that particular museum has this wonderful collection. And I think that a lot of people aren't aware of that, and so baskets have been really valued by people that know what they are and appreciate that work.
As we speak, you have a show up, or you have a show coming. Can you say a little bit about the work in this particular show?
This is a show that has come out of a couple years of work, and there was a huge shift in my work. From working with rattan, I had an illness which I had some physical challenges, and I couldn't work with rattan the way I had. And when I was working with rattan, it's a material you have to soak, prepare that, okay, I'm going to make a basket tomorrow, I'll be soaking this material and cutting spokes and dyeing material and so on. And I would stand at a table that was high so that I could work quite easily by standing there weaving this basket. And because of the physical limitations, I had to let that go. And I'm one to keep my hands busy and not to be idle all that much. And so I had an abundance of cotton cord that I had bought many years before. And I decided I would start weaving with that material. And I really, really enjoyed the technique that I'm currently using, which is called twining. And the soft material was very enjoyable for me to work. I did not have to soak the material. I didn't have to dye the material. It was ready to go. It was portable. I could take it with me wherever I would go if I chose to. And so I started making, because I was considered a contemporary basket maker, I started making round vessels, because baskets, you always think of them probably being round, and I started adding stones to them. I didn't want to add, I didn't want to try to make them pretty. I wanted to add elements to what I was making that would have some meaning to me. So I was using jasper and aventurine and rose quartz and some yellow jade. And then I got kind of bored with making things round, and it was just so familiar. So I then tried, if you're going to start a round base, you're going to have a round basket. And so I started making asymmetrical bases. I made some sort of fan-shaped bases, and as I would weave out further on those, you weave out so far and something has to give. It's not going to stay flat, and so they would start to curve back onto themselves. And so I let go of my control in trying to shape them in a certain way, and I just let them go where they wanted to go. I continued to add more spokes to keep the structure good without compromising that to make it too soft and wouldn't stand on its own. And then I started these red white heart beads that I mentioned. I'm trying to, things become sacred to us sometimes, and so we don't use them, or they're in a box because they're so special. And I decided that I've had these really old red heart beads, why not use them? So I did, and that began the flow of the White Heart trade beads that I use. So all the beads, since I stopped working in the round, are white hearts. They're cobalt blue white hearts, and a white heart bead is, the core of the bead is white, so that's where the name white hearts come from. And I'm using some that are yellow, and then a lot of them are red. So my forms have become more sculptural. I don't know that I can call myself a contemporary basket maker right now, although I'm using a traditional basketry technique. The forms have become much more abstract, and I'm enjoying that. So the show will be, the reception is March 10th. Let's see, that would be next Thursday. And the show will be up at the Textile Center, and it will be up until the end of April.
Mia also has a pretty striking collection in beading. And so it feels like that's a direction, that's something you're also exploring.
Sure. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. I've seen some beautiful beadwork there.
Yeah, and it's a funny kind of an art form, because obviously the native people who picked it up and who did astonishing things with it, they didn't have beads before the trade goods came, so it was a kind of hybrid, a new thing. And also, in the case of the native folks, connected to some real oppression. The beating was being done while, the Cherokee were moved. Do you feel a connection as you do this stuff to the people who did it before, or the people who've done it for like thousands of years? Do you think about the history as you're working, or is it sort of as if, it's, for you, it's a new thing?
For me, it's a new thing. Yes. I'm using them because, some of my work has chambers, and so I connect that to the heart. The white heart beads, because of the core of them being what they are, I connect to them. To me, they have not so much a monetary value, but to me it's the value because of the history of what they are. But yeah, beads are a whole nother area. I don't know a whole lot about, other than the fact that I enjoy. They're beautiful to look at, stitched on garments or shoes, moccasins, and a variety of things.
Do you find that, as you move especially into these more, maybe less controlled and more sculptural kinds of pieces, that life meanings begin to flow into the work in different ways?
Very much so. I feel very emotionally connected to a lot of the pieces that I've made. For me, there was a shift in my work and how I work. I started to let the pieces go, pretty much lead me along and tell me a direction that it should go. There were times I would have 2 or 3 pieces that I'd be working on, not simultaneously, but I would work on one piece and then I just didn't know where it was going. So I would set it aside on my work table where I could still see it, so it could talk to me and invite me to pick it up someday and work with it and see maybe something would develop. It's been really fun for me to let go of that control. Previously, when I worked with shaping, and twill pattern baskets, I would have to calculate the spokes, how many I would have to have that weaver go around and come back around and step up and continue the same pattern. It didn't just happen on its own. So for me, with this particular technique and material I'm using, it's sort of magical to see what develops if you let it. And pretty much most of the pieces, as I was saying, have an emotional connection. There was a time when I needed a lot of rest, and a few pieces are in a reclining position, and they look like they're being embracing oneself. The chambers relating to our heart, some of the pieces are very shell-like in the forms that they took on, and I think some of the shells are formed by the currents, and as I think we all are by what's going on around us. So it was really magical for me to have this experience. It's been a gift to learn something more about myself and how I work.
So, as one gets older, can one keep on with basketry? I mean, how does basketry respond to sort of physical limitations, to arthritis and things like that?
Yeah, my hands are in pretty good shape. I don't know why. So many people say, well, your hands are so soft, you'd think they'd be calloused or something, but I don't see any reason that I would ever stop. I know I could do this without looking at my work, because it's such a automatic motion that I use that I've got it down, and I might not have to visually, look right at the piece while I'm making it. It's sort of like my grandmother when she was crocheting doilies, and I would sit beside her and watch her. I mean, talk about magic. That was magical. With crocheting or another art form, you might need your eyesight to see, where that hook goes into that crocheted piece. With what I'm currently doing, the material that I'm using and the technique, I think I could do it without seeing it, but it wouldn't be as much fun. I can't think of any limitations other than maybe if a person had arthritis, then it might be a challenge. Maybe it would be good for someone with arthritis. I'm not sure. But I don't, it doesn't require a whole lot from you other than weaving. There aren't any tools or equipment that I have to use that I might not someday be able to operate. But I see myself probably making baskets or making fiber objects for as long as I possibly can. I can't imagine right now what would stop me.
One aspect we haven't talked about is teaching. How has that been for you, teaching? Stuff?
Well, teaching has been fine. I'm teaching classes that are different from what I do, such as pine needle basketry. People love to learn how to make pine needle baskets. That seems to be a really popular material for people to learn how to construct something from them. So I'm not sure in what way as far as teaching.
Well, I mean, one thought is, I mean, you've moved, I mean, maybe you just kind of broached this. I mean, you've moved away from the functional, calculated, controlled basket.
Sure.
But I'm guessing you're still what people want to learn is how to keep the thing under control and make a nice round basket that they can, put things in.
I know, they do like that. I just offered a 2-day class in the technique that I'm using, which is twining. And one day was to have the students start their project. They would learn different ways to begin a piece and to weave the sides. And then they would go home and they would have a week to come back, and we would talk about how to finish, different ways to finish them. And the class enrollment was really low. And, I was so excited to teach what I do because I love what I do, and I expect that probably somebody else might too. And so the classes that are well received would be something that they sign up, then it's going to look like this. If students through art centers locally have to create it on their own, it holds them back, I think. And I wonder sometimes if it's lifestyles. Like, I'm very excited about what I do, and I can do it all day long. It brings me joy. And I don't know, I would say that's probably a luxury that I have, that I can do that. And I sometimes think maybe it's lifestyles where people can't commit to 2 days in 2 weeks, or they don't want to figure out how to make an object without a preconceived idea of what it's going to be. So that has changed. Prior to this time, when I was making round baskets that had patterns in them or shaping, people were more interested, I think. And we're all different. I really like to be challenged, and other people might not like to be challenged as much, and it's okay.
Well, I would guess that part of it is people really like to succeed. Mm-hmm. And know they have succeeded.
That's right.
and be able to sort of put it in a box and give it to someone for a present, and they know what they've got. And it's hard. It's hard if once you give up control, it's hard to know when you've succeeded.
When I taught at conventions, we have an allotted amount of time. We might have 6 hours to make a basket, and I would design a piece that I would teach, and people would sign up for that to make that basket. And at the end of the class, you would have 10 or 12 people walking out of the room with almost the same item, and they cherished it. I would say baskets are not for everyone to learn how to make, but people that took basketry classes, they really were proud of what they made. I remember one of my first baskets was a melon basket, which is a lot of the Appalachian baskets are called melon baskets. So it has a handle that goes around and comes underneath as part of the base, and then it has another hoop that's laid horizontally, so that becomes the rim. And I had my first basket that I made, one of my first baskets was a melon basket. I had that basket. I used it for my clothespins. This is back when I lived in the country and I had a clothesline. I would love to hang out clothes, and that's where my clothespins went. It was probably a year or two later that one day I held that basket up and I looked at it, and one side of the basket was bigger than the other side. And I had it for a while. I never saw the flaw in it when I made it. And so when I see people walk out of class and they're very proud of what they just made, it's really a good experience as an instructor to see someone feel so good about something that they made that you taught them how to do.
Yeah. Well, but the problem seems to be, if I'm getting you right, that it's hard to keep the functionality and to keep it interesting for you. That it's got to go in a direction of being less functional in order to be more interesting. It can't.
Yes.
It can't kind of marry the two very easily.
Yeah, it's also the technique that I'm using now and the materials that I'm using are more challenging. It's not a good place to start to learn. Unless you're open to exploration and are okay with it taking a while to. I'm not saying it's impossible for anyone to learn. It's just a more challenging technique, and it takes longer. And so many times we want more instant results, and if we don't get them, then it's discouraging. And you're right. People like to feel good about what they've made, what they've put their time and effort into. And for the most part, I think that happens.
So, at the cutting edge of basket making and the kind of going over into sculptural forms and things that non-functional pieces. Do you have colleagues? I mean, are there people you can talk to about that who are working on things like your own? How's that?
Not
what's
really.
That like?
No, they're really because I'm not traveling to other states and seeing a lot of those teachers that I used to see who were also artists. I don't get a lot of feedback as far as people that are doing the same thing or no one's doing the same thing, but working with a similar material or a similar technique. I have a friend that lives here in the cities that is a fiber artist, and she used to do twined baskets, or I should call them vessels, but she came out of that time like in the 70s when we looked at things, we weren't calling things sculptural as much as we do now. And she and I have met for breakfast approximately once a month in the last probably year and a half. And so I have brought things for her to look at because she critiques constructively and gently. So she would never say, oh, that's really bad, but she would tell me in a nice way that maybe if you do this or whatever. And so she's been a lot of help. I come away, as Mike will attest, each day when I would meet with her, I would come home and I would just be excited because I felt I was going in a good direction. Mike gives me daily affirmation on my work, and is very honest as well if something's not quite going, or how should I say this? It's not heading in a direction I think it's going to work. There are ways of saying, well, maybe pick it up tomorrow, or you see it in a new light at another time. So, but there's no group of people in this area that I know of that's working with the same technique and materials.
So you're kind of on your own.
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. We have the Textile Center, of course, where my show is, and there's a group that meets there each Tuesday morning. And I've thought about joining the group. I'm not much of a joiner of groups and organizations and stuff all that much, and every Tuesday having to do go the same place and stuff. But I've thought that it might be something worth checking out. I think it would be good to get my work out where there are other people who can see it and have suggestions, or just the feedback would be valuable. So that, I guess, would be a good resource to consider.
You brought a basket in progress along today. It seems a shame not to give it
Sure.
a minute of attention.
Yep. This is something that I started a while back. All my work, recent work, is at the Textile Center getting ready to be set up for the exhibition. But this is, I'm not sure I'm black on black here, so it might be a challenge to pick up. This is round, so you know it isn't a piece I just started, but this is an example of some of the pieces. I have, I believe, 3 pieces in the show that started with the same technique. And so this would be started from the bottom. So I started with a round piece here. All of these are, this part here is called, they're called spokes. And these 2 pieces of cord here are called weavers. And my technique is twining. And twining is done with 2 pieces of cord. This could be grass, this could be cattails, this could be willow, could be willow bark, it could be a variety of things. That's what's so exciting about making these sorts of objects, is that it's endless. This spoke here has a knot in it, and this is called the Noor. It's N-O-O-R, and there's a book by Sandra Corey Newman that I read this little story, again, native baskets, that the Noor designates where this piece started, where I first started weaving it. So this is, once I go around, that's a complete row. The story in her book was that if you don't get to your Noor and end the basket there, if you have to get up and leave it for a day or so or for an hour, you must come around to the Noor. And as you can see, I didn't weave this to this spot just now. This was ended at the Noor, so that when I pick it up, I'll start weaving beyond it. The thought behind this was that when this is put down, the angels will come down and stomp on it, and your basket will be no good. So after reading that, ever since I read that, I always get to my Noor and then put the piece down. So now I have these 2 pieces of cord, and this is all cotton, the weavers, as well as the spokes. And so the piece on the left will go in front of the first spoke and behind the second spoke and come back out to the front. I still have the 2 pieces here. The one on the left goes in front of that spoke, goes behind the spoke to its right, and comes back out. And that, by this weaver going to the back, there's a cross that's created in between the 2 vertical spokes that adds strength. So if I were to be weaving on this at home in my studio, I would sit with it on my lap like this, and I become almost automated, and I can look around. I don't have to look at what I'm doing. And that's why when we were talking earlier about as we age, as long as I can move my hands, my fingers, I'll be okay, I think. And I hope to never lose my vision. And so this just continues. You get a nice rhythm, which is partly what I like about it. When I'm sitting at home in my studio weaving like this, I can be miles from where I am. And by that I mean with my thoughts. I can be thinking about what we're going to do that evening, or how many inches of snow are we going to get today. As I'm fortunate to have a window that overlooks the park across the street from us, and so I can daydream a lot by just looking out my window. So that's how it's done, and you weave row after row after row.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.